Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Miller.
And I'm Nazar Yassin.
Welcome to Soul Searching, where we hear the deeper spiritual journey of some of the world's most impactful people. We hope their stories might inspire a more authentic, spiritual, purposeful life of your own.
Depression and obstacles can actually really be a gateway to spiritual opening, an awakening. We find the stories, or we are given the stories that we are meant to tell, but also that are meant to heal us. There's an openness and, a seeking quality, and the feeling that there's so much that I don't know. So it's just sort of, okay, show me the way.
Pam Ryckman, we're so grateful to have you. Pam Ryckman, you are a very celebrated author of the Stiletto Network, author of Candice Pert, New York Times journalist, Goldman Sachs financier, Princeton grad. Today, we're talking about the deep Pam, your spiritual bearings, your inner life.
And I have a deep inner life that I was not very comfortable talking about initially until recently.
So let's start at the deepest part. Would you share maybe something from your childhood, deep spiritual awareness that's always been yours?
Certainly. I started having these experiences as a child where, say, my mother would be late to pick me up from school. And sometimes she'd be at a place where, obviously at the grocery store or someplace on our well-traveled path. But other times she'd be someplace in another town where she hadn't even been before, at the dentist. And I would comfort myself when she was late by imagining her, in my mind's eye, where is she? And I would have this deep inner knowing, and I would know that I was safe and where she was and that she was coming for me.
And was your imagination accurate with the outward physical reality? Is that where your mom really was?
Yes, it was.
So you'd imagine her at a dentist's office somewhere else, and she actually turned out
and
to be
that's
there.
where she had been.
Wow, that's really
And
cool.
Which
so,
we now know through science is indeed imagination, that imagination is not only to construct or make up, but imagination is to receive and perceive that which is real. The mind is an antenna.
Yeah. And that was my experience, but again, I didn't know how to explain it. And this would happen throughout my life. I was traveling solo in the winter after studying abroad, and I'd been alone for 3 weeks and, met people on the trail, but not anyone I knew from home. And all of a sudden, I'm taking a night train from, I think, Venice into Salzburg train station, and I fall asleep for a little while. I have a dream of this woman, Dana Harmon, who I hadn't really even been close with in high school. We were friends in middle school, and I walk out of the Salzburg train station, and there's Dana Harmon.
Come on.
And it was exactly, I could never explain how these things would happen to me. It was a fairly regular occurrence in my life, but again, I didn't put too much weight on it. I didn't really think about it so much. Until, honestly, I had a moment of crisis, and I know Lisa has written and spoken so much about how depression and obstacles can actually really be a gateway to spiritual opening, an awakening, and that's what I experienced through the process of my first book, Stiletto Network. I knew I was waking up knowing that something was changing in the world before I could ever put evidence to it. And I was working as a New York Times journalist, right? I couldn't go to my New York Times journalist and say, oh my gosh, women are going to dinner. I would have been laughed out of the room. So obviously you need hard evidence. You need to sort of build a story. But where that book started for me was with this place being woken up at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning with these lightning bolts, this deep, deep intuition. And essentially now the way I describe it is that I heeded the call, that I felt like a vessel through which, the world could receive a story, but it wasn't mine, and it just kept coming to me. And my job was to sort of understand and unpack and substantiate it, but really it felt like it was divinely guided.
And what about that was struggle or strife opening into awakening? Was that a difficult time in your life, or was it?
Yeah, I was in a very challenging marriage, and I had 3 little kids, and I had taken a job. I had gone from working on Wall Street to a job in journalism where I earned significantly less money. And again, I grew up in a Catholic tradition. No one in my family got divorced. And I was deeply, deeply unhappy and I was struggling with, what do I do? Am I going to mess up my kids? How do I do this? Break up my family and do it in a kind and loving way? And, what they say is research is me search, right? We find the stories, or we are given the stories that we are meant to tell, but also that are meant to heal us. And I didn't know that at the time, or I didn't know how to put words to it, but that, in retrospect, was exactly what was happening to me. And I never could have imagined that by taking this leap of faith which was to write a book. When I started this process, my third son was less than a year old. I mean, I was still nursing. I was exhausted. The last thing I was thinking about was like, I want to take on a big project. I want to write a book.
Yeah.
This is like I was so tired and just kind of dispirited. And following the path, following what was given to me, what now I sort of understand is sort of a divinely guided path, changed my whole life and opened up opportunities that I never could have imagined.
And how would you describe that path in a word? That you were shown that ...
I was shown that my attempts to control my environment and my path and sort of everything in my life had really not turned out as well as I had wanted. There was definitely, I had familial expectations, like I talked about. We live in an achievement-oriented society. And then you get to a point in your life and you say, hold on a second, none of this has really made me happy or fulfilled. There's a longing inside of me that I can't put words to. I don't feel like I'm living my soul's purpose. And by taking this leap of faith and relinquishing control and actually following what felt like the will of a higher power allowed me to even achieve more than I ever could have otherwise. Like I couldn't have dreamt of the work that I'm doing now.
Did you feel carried or buoyant? Were you aligned with a force?
Yes, very much. I mean, like I said, I was being awakened at 2 or 3 in the morning with these lightning bolts going to my computer, and then I'd write till 6, and my ex-husband would wake up and be like, "What on earth are you doing?"
Right.
And then I'd have to get up and take care of the kids and all this stuff, and then go back to work. I was working at all hours. In many ways, there's an unhealthy aspect of this, which is like I lost probably 10 or 15 pounds. I looked like emaciated. My head felt like it was on fire. But
Singularly passionate.
Singularly passionate.
Would you say called?
Yes, 100%.
And how long? Sorry, how long did
please.
it take? Like once you started listening to the universe and not trying to just talk to the universe and say, "I'm going to do this," but once you started listening and kind of flowing with writing this book, how long did it take for you to realize, you know what, this is the right path?
It was immediate, and there was no doubt in my mind. It was just, I just followed. But it took me a really long time to sort of come down from that process. Again, put words to it, develop a vocabulary. I mean, what I ended up doing was also deep spiritual research to actually understand the science and the experience that I was having. I knew I was having an experience, but I didn't get it. So I was talking to people who were, sort of priests and rabbis and also psychics or people who were mystics. I was doing a lot of reading to try to understand what was my felt experience.
A seeker.
Yeah, being a seeker.
A seeker. And of course, for the many people who've already read Stiletto Network, the main message was that indeed women can come together and be generative and prosperous and highly successful. So you were in a situation that had a message that both carried you forward and many women forward.
Yeah.
Let's move to the next book. Did you have a similar process of a transcendent tap? Hey, this one's yours.
I did. And so, what happened after Stiletto Network is that book got optioned, and I ended up moving into sort of film and TV work. Again, I never could have imagined it. I've been a theater geek my whole life, but I was sort of doing it on the side as a passion or a project, and now it's my real job. Now I get to do this work that I love so much. And so I read Candice Pert was a renowned scientist, and I'll tell you more about her in a minute, but she had written a memoir in 1997 called Molecules of Emotion that I read, with my producer hat on, and I was like, holy cow, this is like Hidden Figures meets A Beautiful Mind. This is an incredible book, and I wanted to make it into a film. So I reached out to her widower, got the rights to her book, and then put on my journalist hat and said, well, hold on a second. She died in 2013. Her book was published in 1997. Let's figure out, how does the story end? But really what I was like, what are the last 30 pages of a script?
So who is Candice Pert?
Yeah. Candice Pert is an incredible scientist. I joke around that she's sort of a Forrest Gump type figure because she played really pivotal roles, not only in American science, but also in American politics. So in 1972, as a 26-year-old grad student at Johns Hopkins in psychopharmacology, she discovered the opiate receptor.
Candice Pert discovered
yes.
the opiate receptor.
Wow.
That is the story of the mind-body movement that we now see today.
100%.
So would you say she was even the scientific foundation?
Yes. Yeah. So she, of course, that led to the opiate crisis, but it also led her to do this seminal research. In the early 1980s, she proved the mind-body link. She showed that the brain, it was previously believed that the brain was the control center of the body. She showed that, in fact, the brain is not the control center, but works in concert with our immune system, our endocrine system, our gastrointestinal system, in this constant feedback loop to shape our thoughts and emotions, like indeed to create our entire reality. So what she was doing was not only pushing the bounds of her field, but also overturning the reigning paradigm that had defined Western medicine. And, how does that go back to spirituality? Like, how is that linked? I mean, the answer is in every single way. Her story is a story of a hardcore bench scientist. I mean, she got her PhD from Johns Hopkins. She rose to become chief of brain biochemistry at the NIH. She's a hardcore scientist who then uses science as a vehicle toward her own spiritual transformation and her own spiritual awakening.
You found this in her memoir. You found this in doing research on primary sources. Did you look at letters? How did you dig into the life of Candice Pert?
Honestly, everything. So, I really did put on my journalist hat again and do a deep dive, because what I thought was a film became a book because of all this rich, there was so much rich primary material. Her widower provided me with with a treasure trove of archival material that had not been, explored previously.
Letters or
letters
journals?
All of the above. All of the, and also her sister, who helped her in various endeavors, was sort of OCD and had kept these incredible notes. So I had primary research articles that you couldn't even get from the library on microfiche. They were like PDFs of articles from 1981 in sort of weird press sources.
8 years of research is a very deep dive.
Yeah.
What compelled you to keep going? What was your deeper mission in all of this? And was there any of Candice woven into this?
Oh, there was a lot of Candice woven into
Tell
this.
us.
Okay, so before I'm going to link it back to the sort of spiritual theme, but let me explain sort of how part of what I was finding also is that her, Deepak Chopra wrote the foreword to her memoir. He credits her with laying the scientific foundation for what became his blockbuster career. Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, that has been on the New York Times bestseller list for years. He doesn't name check Candice, but her work completely underpins that entire book. Here was this woman who changed history, whose discoveries were absolutely groundbreaking, but who has been sort of largely forgotten in modern times. But she laid the foundation for what we now call integrative or functional medicine. And so what's happening right now, particularly in our country, politically, the Maha movement, her work is so relevant, and yet her story has not been celebrated. So in some ways, I'm drawn to female-driven stories. These illuminating truth, bringing to light stories of particularly women who have been either silenced. I mean, she was legitimately sabotaged and undermined in many ways at the NIH.
Wow.
So her story is, I'm a fangirl, but her story is largely a tragedy, is what I was discovering. And thinking about, wrestling with myself sort of in a moral way. I started as a fangirl, and then I realized, Candice was deeply flawed. But that said, she's no less important in history because of her flaws.
And her role at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, she had a very prominent role there, right? I mean, could you get into that a little bit?
She did, certainly. She was overturning a paradigm that had been initiated by Descartes. René Descartes, the father of modern science and medicine. And this is so funny. In the 1600s, the story of how this happened is quite funny, because in the 1600s, Descartes wanted to dissect bodies. He wanted to understand human anatomy. So he had to make a deal with the Pope that above the neck, that the mind, where they thought was, contained in the brain, held man's inherent sacredness. And if that was the case, then the body was like a meat sack, And once the soul, which again they had located in the brain, once the soul had departed, then the body was fair game for science. You could perform an autopsy and it wasn't a desecration. So Descartes makes this deal with the Pope, and that defines the rest of Western medicine as we know it.
Wow.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's
Wow.
really cool.
So what happens is, we decide, as opposed to Eastern medicine, where they believe in a life force or prana or chi, right, that travels throughout
the body is
body,
sacred.
that the body is sacred. So when Candice discovered these peptides that flow, that she called the information molecules that flow from the brain throughout all of our systems, and actually what she was saying is the mind or consciousness or insert word soul is not located in the brain at all. It's in our body. It's in innate fluid intelligence. She was challenging the very basis on which Western medicine was built. And actually, if you look at the way the NIH has been structured, it's slightly more collaborative today. But 40 years ago, if you're a virologist, you're not thinking about how to, you're thinking about how disease replicates or how to eradicate disease, but you're not thinking about what caused the disease in the first place. Candice Pert was the first person to say that stress could cause disease. She was looking at what ways to, like, again, integrative health, functional health, ways to proactively help the body, heal the body before disease ever had a chance to take hold. She was raised secularly Jewish, but she came to sort of really believe in the Christian teachings of forgiveness by Jesus Christ, and also adopt a much more Buddhist or Hindu notion of life of interconnectedness. She saw her body as part as part of a much greater whole, connected to other people, connected to the earth, connected to the sacred universe. And that was bearing fruit in her science. So Candice was on this spiritual journey. She ended up becoming sort of toward the end of her life this New Age icon who led this movement. But at the time, she was uttering heresy in the field of science. I mean, she was being laughed out of rooms. But there's another part of the story, and here's part of the tragedy, that in my journalistic work, what I was uncovering is that many people believe that Candice Pert did not die a natural death. And, she dropped dead prematurely at age 67. And
the brilliant scientific founder of integrative medicine, Candice Pert, appears not to have died a natural death.
Many people thought that. Her children, many family members, many, colleagues, associates, her investors. I had a hunch. And again, it's that inner knowing, right? When you sort of say, something doesn't feel right here, and I don't know why, and I'm just going to keep digging and digging and trying to understand what really happened to this woman. And she did not receive an autopsy. Okay, well, why? What happened there? And so I started doing some digging. Again, I started being awakened in the middle of the night. Tap, tap, tap.
What does that feel like when you're awakened in the middle of the night?
Sometimes it can be disturbing, and sometimes it can be illuminating, and sometimes it can be, now I've learned how to sort of say, okay, I know what that means, or like I'm supposed to know something, just wait, just sit and receive, right? But other things started happening. Candice,
when you received in the middle of the night information, was it a felt sense? Was it sometimes auditory? Was it direct knowing? How did you, in terms of the brain as an antenna, in terms of receiving transcendent awareness, consciousness, how for you, Pam, does it arrive into your awareness?
Candice doesn't appear in front of me. It's a feeling that she is with me, and that she is guiding my research, and that she wants her story told. And so, but by the way, she's a tough broad, right? So when Candice Pert wakes you up in the middle of the night, you're like, hold on, like, give me a break, sister. Like, there were times where actually she was so insistent that I had to tell her to go away and leave me alone, because I couldn't do my work unless I was like, I am in this 100%. I have to sleep, and you have to let me sleep so that I can tell your story.
So she was forceful.
Can we double click on this? Because this is fascinating to me. So, you're an incredibly rational, accomplished person. Princeton, Goldman Sachs, New York Times, you name it.
2 books.
2 books. I've never experienced a mystical experience, and so I'm always super curious and a little jealous of people who have. Like, what's that like, and how did you know that you were experiencing a mystical experience and not something else?
Again, I'd In the last 15 years, I've delved pretty deeply into this world, and I've sort of spent a lot of time meditating, and I've done past life regressions, and I've done, I again, in my rational world, I am not always open with this part of my life, but I feel like I've become much more comfortable, and I sort of can feel the signs. There are times where I can feel other people's energy or see an aura or things like that. And now it actually sort of informs everything I do, and I sort of talk about it more openly, and the feelings that I am led into situations, professional situations. I do an internal check-in. How do I feel? Not what do I think, but how do I feel about this? And that will tell me where I need to go. Because when I have denied my intuition before, I've inevitably been led astray, both in business and in life. When I go and check in, and when we say a gut feeling, Candice did that research that made me understand that actually the brain is the last to catch up. The brain is like the processor once your body has already decided what you think and where you should go. So you could say that's a scientific process. It also has roots in divinity, but it's kind of what works for me,
So just to put this in another way, maybe, and tell me if this is right or wrong, but if you're allowing other parts of yourself to experience things and to form this intuitive feeling that things are happening, sometimes the brain is the last one to catch up. And so is that the difference between kind of like the achieving mindset and the awakened mindset? Is just not letting everything, not forcing everything to come through your brain through rational thinking.
Brought together.
Is that, I mean, is that
awakened
is that
and
fair?
achieving awareness hand in hand?
I feel
a
like
life of quest.
Yeah. That's exactly right. To sort of keep your mind and your heart open, and I say mind in terms of not located in the brain, but all in the body. And there's an openness and a seeking quality, and the feeling that there's so much that I don't know. So it's just sort of, okay, show me the way. What's next? As opposed to the achievement mindset is like control, chart a path. I know what's best for myself. I kind of don't. Like if you ask, I have no idea what the rest of my life is going to hold now. But I sort of have this faith that it's all going to be fine, and if I just continue living like this, it's going to lead me someplace great. I was on the phone with Candice's son, Evan, because he became convinced that his mother had been killed. He had a psychotic break. Candice was bipolar, and Evan, it's very rare to sort of develop the first symptoms of bipolar disorder in your late 40s. He always had sort of a manic charged quality, but never had fallen into depressions. He had a psychotic break, and he struggled since then. His life is back on track now. He's just an incredibly beautiful soul and a brilliant guy, but has really struggled since his mother's death. And one day I was on the phone with him, and, again, I've become very close with her family, and I was, sitting in front of a table, there's no window around, and all of a sudden, a rainbow appeared across my table when I was talking to him, and I felt Candice talking through me to him, and I don't even remember what I said. It was about how proud she was of him. The rainbow was one of Candice's big symbols in her life. She had one of her first mystical experiences involved. It was at the Haleakala crater in Maui, where she turned a corner and she saw this beautiful rainbow, and she had a spiritual epiphany that actually informed her scientific work. And this was her symbol, and it appeared across my table, and then all of a sudden I felt her speaking through me to her son. So this story, where has it led me? It's been also, her story is one of tragedy in many ways, and it's, there's been a lot of crying that I've done with her family. It's been a really healing journey too, where by illuminating the truth, it's allowed her family members to tell each other things that they hadn't told each other before, to sort of really put this together so that we can all achieve a sense of peace.
Would you say that at the end of the day, Candice was something of a warrior, perhaps, and that you are too?
By the way, she continues to be.
And that you are too.
I have realized, through this work, my soul's purpose, which is to be a voice for people who have no voice, and an illuminator of truth, to actually serve. This is work that is, yes, I am achieving while doing it, but it is really work in service of not myself, but something bigger. And hopefully, we're at a time where humanity is so divided, and where we are not connected to our spiritual mother that is this beautiful earth. And we are increasingly disconnected from each other. So if I can use my powers to help bring people together and unite them through telling stories that shape hearts and minds, then I will have done something.
People like Candice, to me, are so incredibly interesting and important in our modern time right now, because there are so many people who are skeptical, who don't believe in anything beyond what they can see with their own two eyes.
Yeah.
And when you have a scientist who's using science to explore and illuminate that science and spirituality aren't different at all, actually they lead to the same place, people like Candice, people like you, people like Einstein, people like Isaac Newton, who were very publicly recognized as scientists, but also very publicly spiritual too.
Yeah.
And so I think illuminating those stories, it helps people like me, certainly, you know, the engineer, finance, techie people who are just kind of like, you know, give me something I can latch onto, give me some facts that I can latch onto, to be able to like stack up the facts and say, oh, okay, this is where the things intersect. It's okay to be spiritual and to think of yourself as spiritual. That doesn't mean you're kooky, right? Because it's based in science. I think these stories are so important.
Descartes' story is completely misunderstood. In 1619, Descartes, who's, again, I think, therefore I am, the father of modern rationalist thought and science, right? He had a series of 3 dreams where he was visited. He was a devout Catholic. He said he was visited by the Spirit of Truth, and that those dreams inspired him to consecrate himself to the Blessed Virgin Mary and go on a pilgrimage from Venice to Notre Dame de Lorette. And during that pilgrimage, the insight that he received is that he was a tool. And he was following his divine guidance, and his divine guidance was telling him to make sense that God had given us this beautiful world that we could understand, and our job was to sort of understand it for the benefit of humanity, but all creatures. And that actually, the grand irony of his statement, I think, therefore I am, is that it was channeled from this transcendent place of open feeling. It wasn't a rational statement at all. It had rational implications, but it was actually a story of divine communion.
Wow. So I receive divine awareness, therefore I am.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
The way that she proved the mind-body link is she found peptides that exist in the brain that also exist in the immune system, that also in all of our other systems. And she called peptides, she called them the molecules of emotion, or these information molecules or messengers that send signals, to create this constant feedback loop. And so in Western medicine, we used to believe that the emotional brain was again, sacredness, brain, soul, it was all held up here. That it was in the hippocampus and the amygdala, and so, that it was all in the brain. What Candice found was that actually all of these peptides would travel along in nerve bundles along the spinal cord, and that there were clusters of receptors that sent out, big signals, right? And where are those clusters of receptors? At our root, at our intestines, right here, our heart, our throat,
at
our
our
forebrain.
chakras.
Exactly at the what Hindus believe are these sort of energy vortices, these that create all life force. So she proved the existence of the chakras. She had never heard of chakras. She found this out afterward, and again, that's why she started looking toward the Eastern path as potentially the way to really address the body in a holistic way.
I find it moving that 70% of scientists say their most profound discovery, certainly 70% of landmark scientists say their most profound discovery came as a form of awakened awareness, an intuition, a dream, a synchronicity, a mystical
Eureka
experience.
moment or
A
something.
eureka moment, the proverbial apple on the head.
Right.
Yeah.
So 70% of scientists to shift and change their fields say that it is actually through mystical awareness that new ideas have been discovered. Sure, science is a methodical rollout after we pose the question, but the question is where gains and leaps forward are found.
Yeah.
Candice was a mystic. Pam Ryckman, you're a mystic. Perhaps the scientists, like the poets and the musicians, are mystics amongst us.
I believe that very much. I mean, when they talk about, the muse or creative work, that's inspiration. I mean, does that make you a mystic, or does it make you, or are we all just given nuggets that can help move ourselves and humanity forward if we're only willing to listen?
I think it does make you a mystic, and I think we're all mystics.
Yeah. We all have the capacity, for sure.
To awaken.
Yeah. I believe that entirely.
We're so delighted that you're taking up the call, that you said yes. Well, maybe you didn't have a choice.
I didn't have a choice, but I feel so lucky that I did.
You got the tap on the shoulder.
It is. This
But
is
we
the
honor how
scariest
very,
way to
very
live
well.
life, but it is also the most exciting way to live
With such
life.
passion and brilliance and steadfast devotion.
I got to a point where I'm like, if I live this way any longer, I will be a shell of myself. I mean, it sounds so hyperbolic to say my soul will die, but I felt like I wouldn't be a good mom. I wouldn't be a good partner. I wouldn't be a good steward to my resources, both internal and external. I needed a change in my life, a deep, deep change. And
I think everyone feels that at some point.
Totally.
I never could
Yes.
have imagined where it would take me, and I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to be here. You know, I wasn't doing fun podcasts like this before.
Well, we celebrate you, and we celebrate the way that you've carried the torch of truth. Pam Ryckman, thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a great pleasure.